May we ask you to take your seats, please, in the hall?
Nochmal, mach mal auf jetzt hier. Bitte doch nochmal aufmachen, man hat sie nicht gehört.
Please take your seats in the hall. Dürfen wir bitten, dass Sie bitte zu Ihren Plätzen gehen?
Leo, vielleicht machst du den Lichtstimmungswechsel. Vielleicht hilft das uns.
Soll ich nochmal? Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please take your seats. Meine Damen und Herren, nehmen Sie bitte Ihre Plätze.
Wer kümmert sich denn um die Presse jetzt hier? Guck mal, was hier vorne los ist. Wieso denn das? Wir haben es doch umgekehrt gehabt. Erst der Film und dann kommt der. Man macht jetzt, wie ihr es wollt.
Aber muss ich Ihnen dann nicht ansagen?
Welcome to the 2010 International Transport Forum in Leipzig. Transport and Innovation. Unleashing the Potential.
Aus.
Meine Damen und Herren, der
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Guten Tag. I'm Melinda Crane, and I have the great honor to be your moderator for the plenary sessions of today's Forum 2010. Our topic today, as you know, is transport and innovation, unleashing the potential. And we're going to be talking about the ways that innovation, and not just technical innovation, but institutional, financial, indeed systemic innovation, can help the global transport system to meet the pressing challenges of the future. Many of you were here last year when we addressed the urgent short-term problems that were being raised by the financial crisis. And of course, many of those problems are still with us. But today we also want to take a broader view. We want to look into the future. We want to talk about vision. And we've got some truly visionary speakers to help us do that. But before we get to them, a few hints about translation. As you've noticed, I will be speaking English, but we've got quite a number of other languages on our panels today. So you may need a headset. If you do not have one, please go back out to the foyer and the hostesses will give you one, or you may have found one on your chair. And now I'm going to read off some channels for the different languages that we may need. English, channel 11. French, channel 10. German, channel 8. Japanese, channel 7. Russian, channel 9. Spanish, channel 6. And Chinese, channel 5. So if you don't have your headset yet, please do avail yourself of one. Well, innovation starts, of course, with inspiration. And to begin, let's hear from the man who has been the inspiration for this forum for the past 3 years and as it goes into its 4th year. Please give a very warm welcome to Jack Short, Secretary General of the International Transport Forum.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. President, Minister Merrifield, Minister Ramsauer, Ministers, Mayor Young, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, and many friends too, of course. A sincere welcome to you all. We're honoured and delighted that so many of you have come, despite your busy schedules and the many problems our sector always seems to face. Many of you too have come great distances, and we very much appreciate the efforts you have made to be here. Mr. President, we are very honoured you are here. I think it is a continuing sign of Germany's strong commitment to this relatively new concept of a global forum for transport, and we take your presence as a recognition of that, but also as a recognition at the highest level of the importance of transport for our societies and economies. Most of this audience believes that very strongly, but we think that in the world of politics in general, and maybe in the public eye, the importance of transport is not as well appreciated as it might be. And this is one of the aims of the forum, to try and increase the attention given to transport and a better understanding of how people see its importance. So we are very grateful for your presence for those reasons. You should know, though, that transport is faster, safer, cleaner and more efficient than it ever has been. But of course, this is not enough. We still kill about 1.3 million people on our roads. We emit almost a quarter of the CO2 emissions. We cause congestion and time losses worth billions of euros or dollars. And yet, at the same time, there are millions of people around the world who do not have proper access to all the services that transport provides. The public expectations about transport are extremely high, and they're rising. People always want more and better from transport. transport is taken for granted in the population, as we saw recently. And everyone is an expert. That makes transport policy rather difficult. When things go wrong, transport ministers usually get the blame. And as a result, transport ministers spend a great deal of their time dealing with specific problems like strikes or crashes or breakdowns or ash clouds, and perhaps too little dealing with the many strategic challenges that we face in our sector. And these strategic challenges are immense. We have to reduce the deaths, we have to reduce the emissions, the congestion, we have to improve our intermodal services, we have to improve economic efficiency, user information, and we have to do all that nationally and internationally. And somehow we have to find the resources for all of that. Without innovation, these problems will not go away. As the Canadian Minister said yesterday, innovation is an option. This is going to be a difficult period for transport in many parts of the world. We see investment declining, and it seems set to decline further in many countries. Maintenance is being skimped in many countries, causing problems now, but storing up greater problems later. The arguments for maintaining or increasing transport expenditure are very strong, but in any case, innovations in financing seem absolutely necessary. We have over 50 countries present here, and of course there are very large differences between them on all measures of transport performance. There is therefore still a great opportunity to share better the good experiences and practices there are among the countries. One country's current practice is another's innovation, and I think that's a very important reason we are together, is to share good practice and to learn from each other. But I think in our sector we need to go well beyond good practice and seek out more fundamental changes, to change, for example, the energy base of our sector, to reduce the huge safety differences between the modes, to fill the information gaps. And here, international exchange, cooperation and shared programs for progress are even more important than ever. We had a fascinating day yesterday with some inspiring keynotes, notably from Bertrand Piccard, who urged us all to throw out the ballast, throw out our baggage and start again. We had intense panel discussions on a wide range of topics like wireless technology, seamless transport, the future of aviation. And we have prepared overnight the summaries of all these sessions for you, and they are all available on the outside of the room. There were many interesting ideas raised in these discussions, but one that seemed to be shared in all of the sessions was that managing the transition to new technology, managing the transition for innovation, can be even more difficult than developing the technology itself. In many cases, it was said that we have the technology, but that getting to it and getting all the actors, all the institutions together, many of them outside the traditional transport domain, is one of the biggest challenges that we have. All the material from yesterday, including the keynotes, the papers and so on, all available on the website, and you can see that at the coffee break on the many places out there to have a look. But of course it wasn't all work yesterday, and we had a wonderful reception hosted by our presidency, Canada, in the Opera House, and so we'd like to thank Canada very much for the wonderful evening, and the town of Leipzig for lending us its Opera House for the evening. So we had also a nice social time. Just to finish, transport has no choice. It must respond to the challenges we face in new ways. And innovation is the only way for our sector to serve society and economies efficiently, safely and cleanly. So thank you very much.
Jack just mentioned the challenge of bringing people together to work together to introduce innovation. And you're going to be hearing a lot about that topic of connection today and in the coming discussions, both in the narrower sense of connectivity, of the informational technologies that can make transport more efficient, more safe, but also in the broader sense of connection as inclusiveness, as breaking down the barriers that hinder creative change. Germany's President, Horst Köhler, has made his calling of promoting connection in this greater sense. He negotiated the Maastricht Treaty on European Monetary Union on behalf of Germany. He represented former Chancellor Helmut Kohl during the G7 summits of that time. And he served as managing director of the IMF. In his current office, he has taken a truly innovative approach to promoting integration, both here in Germany and abroad. Mr. Bundespräsident, it is a very great honor to welcome you to the podium.
Put on your earsets. I'm going to speak in German.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was a few weeks ago when half the world looked towards Iceland. Everybody was talking about the ash plume of the volcano, with a name which is almost impossible to pronounce for us Germans. We didn't really see the ash cloud in Europe, and you couldn't really smell it. However, you could feel it. You could feel the ash cloud almost everywhere, because it crippled aviation. Holiday makers were basically stranded abroad, and managers were grounded. Fruit and vegetables rotted on the ground. And lots of factories and plants didn't have spare parts. So first, no deliveries, and then a stop to production. So our highly mobile society experienced what happens if only one carrier fails, if only one transport mode fails, because nature has erected boundaries. Was that a taster of what is going to happen due to climate change and the scarcity of oil? But luckily that is not the case. Luckily that is not the case, as climate change and scarcity of oil will not come overnight, will not come upon us overnight like a volcanic eruption. We can prepare for that and we can adapt to that, and I say better sooner than later. However, the challenges are huge. Today, almost 7 billion people live on this earth. In 40 years' time, in 2050, it will be much more, many more than 9 billion people. Those billions of people are separated by a lot, by mountains, by seas, by language barriers, but they have a lot in common as well. The need for mobility, the wish for mobility, and the desire to have an active part in the world economy. So transport has a huge importance and is key for cooperation and wealth of the nations. So over the last couple of decades, mobility of goods and people has skyrocketed worldwide. And that was only the beginning. Experts think, and you know that very well, experts estimate that the number of vehicles between 2002 and 2030 will double. Aviation in Asia and South America, which so far has just been a fraction of the density elsewhere, will skyrocket as well. And in the Western industrial nations, the values we have achieved here, if the same happens, and if that is extrapolated in other continents as well, you will become dizzy, and it boggles the mind. However, if that entails additional burdens for our resources and for the environment, it shouldn't just boggle our minds, but we should be frightened, and that should instill great fear among us. Between 13 and 14% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by transport, and some other estimates are much higher even. And we cannot put up with that. We shouldn't accept that. So it is clear that the world doesn't just need more mobility. The world, for the sake of our ecosphere, so for the sake of ourselves, needs better mobility. Better mobility is what we need. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you are well aware of that. So I know you are working on that, so that the worldwide transport system becomes more friendly to the environment and more efficient. But you are in competition with an expansion of transport and with the burdens which we have to grapple with the present amount of transport. But it's very crucial that we are successful. It depends on lots of factors. General Secretary Mr. Short pointed it out. It depends on wise political framework conditions, political progress, innovation, and the fact that all players act responsibly. The World Transport Forum can bring all those factors together. And for that reason, it is a crucial hub for a dialogue about sustainable mobility. It has been for that reason that I gladly accepted the invitation to speak at this forum, and Mr. Ramsauer had invited me to this forum, and I gladly accepted. I'm very happy that high-ranking, top-notch decision-makers from all over the world have come together here in order to discuss mobility and innovative concepts for the 21st century. I would also like to welcome you, a warm welcome on my behalf. Welcome to Germany, a country which has been in love with mobility from the aviation pioneer Otto Lilienthal, Gottlieb Daimler, the car maker, Ferdinand Graf von Zeppelin, the engineer behind the Zeppelin, and those three have opened up new vistas and have caused problems as well, as we now know. I became aware of that last week when I visited the Expo 2010. Shanghai, a world metropolis, is a good showcase for that, with its huge port installations and bridges, with a huge system of subways and undergrounds, with a dense network of roads and motorways, but also with its pollution and clouds of smog. The Expo shows clearly that China is working feverishly on better infrastructure and mobility which is kinder to the environment and which is more environmentally compatible. They are working on clean drive technologies. And everywhere we see examples that you can achieve a lot when we ditch old habits and when we throw off the ballast. The Hanseatic city of Bremen in northern Germany presented its carpool model and showed the people in Shanghai that in their city, if they had the same kind of carpool, 180,000 cars could be used less, which would be a good contribution to wiser mobility, to smarter mobility. What we have in mind in Germany is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 by 40%. The EU wants to reduce it by 30%, and other continents will have to face up to that as well and will have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that is in their own sheer self-interest as well. What can the transport sector do despite the growth in transport? What can we contribute to that? And how do we want to organize it? Perhaps I can give you some of my thoughts on that. The World Transport Forum 2010, as far as I can see, is trying to find answers, especially as far as technical innovations are concerned. Mr. Short, you have hinted as much. And there are many chances involved, but innovation as the cue. If you just think about low-emission vehicles, that is too little. That is not enough. So we have to come up with ideas how to avoid unnecessary distances, unnecessary transport, and how we can plan our cities and towns in a better way. Let us think about it, what we like about our mobile lifestyle, and what is a nuisance for us, and what costs a lot of money and time, what we should keep and what we should jettison. Let's think about how we want to live, what good mobility concepts can contribute to that, and how we can make them attractive to all of us. Right at the beginning, right at the inception, we have to face up to the question what we consider worthwhile and what the costs involved are. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you an example. When you have a look at Berlin, in Berlin this week we had coaches and buses with the advertising slogan of a airline, Norway comes closer. Norway comes closer was the strapline, was the slogan. They offered a flight to Oslo for 29 euros. So Norway, however, hasn't come a single inch closer. Oslo is still 1,000 kilometers away from Berlin. So, how important is it for people in Berlin to spend the money they would spend on one necktie for a flight to Oslo? But what does the flight to Oslo cost in terms of resources and environmental damage, which is not reflected in that price? Those who transport goods and people have to pay for fuel, for personnel, for charges and fees for the actual carriers, but they don't really pay for pollution, for noise, for health costs, for environmental damage and climate damage. It is only for that reason, to give you a different example, to give you another example, only for that reason it can be cheaper to basically to have crabs from the Baltic Sea, to ship them to Morocco and then ship them back to Germany, to ship goods to and fro. I mean, this is not a good idea because pricing is not right either, and pricing is not complete and doesn't reflect everything. I'm convinced consumers would be prepared to pay more for a shellfish which has traveled a long way if they knew what the real costs are to society and the societies at large, because a lot of people love their environment. Unfortunately, too often the environmental damage has not a price attached as yet. So, true costs and the truth about those costs would lead to more environmentally compatible solutions, would make railways and shipping more attractive. Then we would basically extend our railway network. However, better pricing can be enforced by political decisions and can be achieved by political decisions. This is a task for the European Union as well. The European Union wants to create trans-European networks, but it should also look after a fair competition among the different modes of transport. Otherwise, we would distort the competition and would entrench that distortion in competition. So a first step for true costs is being made in aviation. Aviation will be included in cap and trade schemes next year, in emission trading next year. Unlike the electricity tax, which railway companies have to pay, kerosene and aviation fuels are exempt from that tax. Wouldn't it be juster not to exempt kerosene and ship fuel from that tax? And we should do that at an international level and in as international a way as possible. I know whatever that will lead to difficult and fierce negotiations. The Chicago Convention is one thing we have to keep in mind. But we should go about it, and there are representatives here from all over the world who would like to work on that. Truth about the cost basically will lead to intelligent solutions combining different modes of transport in an optimum way. And truth about the costs will lead to a dissemination of innovation, like lightweight containers for aviation purposes, hybrid drives, for instance, for lorries and trucks, and low CO2 container terminals and traffic guidance systems to avoid congestion. However, this truth about costs and the competition entailed is not convenient and is not a cushy thing. However, it offers lots of chances for Europe and Germany as well. We are very ambitious as far as environmental technologies are concerned, and we have been very successful already, and we should be confident about the future. And something else should lead to truthful pricing. Some transports should be avoided altogether. If we don't achieve that to a considerable degree, as some speakers said at the World Transport Forum 2008, then we will not be able to avoid a situation that transport emits more and more greenhouse gases. When you have a look at the forecasts for transport, well, that instills fear in me, as we need growth in emerging countries, in poorer countries. However, we cannot basically enjoy that growth if we don't rupture the link between that growth and a burden on the environment. Less transport does not necessarily mean economic decline. For instance, industrial clusters or the formation of industrial clusters has a positive effect on transport balance overall, as it means short distances. And those industrial clusters are about creativity and better cooperation among companies, creating additional wealth. That has been an experience for us in Germany, especially in and around Leipzig, Mr. Mayor. Also, the rediscovery of regional economic cycles can lead to a situation that transport is mitigated and that there is less transport need. And we should also wonder and ask ourselves whether the international division of labor has gone too far. Also, the rediscovery of regional economic cycles can contribute to a situation where we have less transport. From an environmental point of view, I think this is bad logistics when milk or dairy products are being shipped back and forth to and fro all over Europe. I think it is highly questionable when piglets from Germany are being shipped all over Europe in order for those piglets to return to Germany in the shape of ham back to Germany. So I take it agriculture is one industry of many where we have to think about it, how produce can be produced and marketed in a more regional way, thus avoiding long distances, our necessary transport, and all that is kinder to our fellow creatures, the animal kingdom. It also makes for a safer and better nutritional values, and it keeps jobs in those regions. So we have to ditch that kind of blinkered thinking. That we are basically isolated countries, continents. There are differences in interests, of course. There are different conditions in different countries. Of course, there have to be different solutions, but we also know everything has to be a network on this planet, as we have only one joint future. Everything has to be entwined. Everything has grown together globally. But for that, we now need international mobility policies and an international mobility strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of the Expo 2010 in Shanghai is Better Cities, Better Life. That is a good slogan. The UN forecast for 2050 that 7 in 10 people, so 6.5 billion people will live in cities, will live in urban regions. So the majority of people will live in urban conurbations. Even nowadays, more than half of all the people live in cities and urban conurbations. That can be a curse, can be a bane or a boon. And the question whether it is bane or boon is a matter how we organize it. And if you want to imagine how it is working, have a look at Lagos in Nigeria, at Rio, at Mumbai, where you may wonder how those cities can even organize themselves. So the problems are tangible. The air is being polluted, noise, very often during the night even, huge heaps of waste, and there is congestion so that urban transport grinds to a standstill, and all that is huge waste. That is a reality already nowadays in some of the big mega cities. However, urban life can look much different as well. Cities are a big chance. They are a seedbed for innovative ideas and technical progress. Now, that is has been our historical experience. That people live closely together leads to more efficient organization and is kinder to the environment. That is a very interesting challenge for logistics companies to have a part in that transformation. Those who have smart ideas how to guarantee mobility of people and the feeding of people, those who show what such a lifestyle can look like, those who show how that can be in line with the environment, will not just be a trailblazer, but they will generate income as well, more and better than others. At the German pavilion at the Expo in Shanghai, this city is called a balance city, as we say in German. So basically, a city in a balance. What it means is the balance between innovation and tradition, between commonwealth and individual, between city and nature, pastime and work, globalization and regionalization. So a balanced city, a city which is balanced. Those who want this kind of city have to start with the actual planning now. Investments which are being made today will not have an effect until in a few years' time, and will then have an effect for decades to come. There are lots of ideas. Some of those ideas may still be a utopian dream, like those ideas by the scientist Michael Braungart. His ideas of a model village looks like this. the houses are made of materials which clean the air and which generate clean water. This is already feasible from a technological point of view. On the roofs, there is grass, there are fields even, with plants and animals. Or the idea invented by G.H. Crawford, who describes underground supply systems where goods and people are being transported fast and reliably. And there is a lot more. There are lots more of those utopian dreams. But I think we have to look seriously into those dreams. Better sooner than later. Let me repeat that. What is not a utopian dream anymore is the city of short distances. The city is planned in such a way that living, shopping, work, kindergartens are close to each other. With that, everything is within easy walking distance. And another German mobility pioneer has vented ideas here. I beg your pardon that I go on and on about Germans. Karl von Drais, who invented the bike. And basically who also came up with a vehicle which was not horse-drawn, but turned out to be very valuable when another volcanic eruption led to a year without a summer and without oats. Without being able to grow oats. So that vehicle was not horse-drawn. But a city without short distances needs mobility as well, needs good public transport. We have seen that in a lot of cities and haven't achieved that in a lot of cities as yet. This is a challenge for the logistics industry as well. This is not just about buses and urban transport. Public transport has a lot of facets. The other day I learned about the idea from a company which wants to buy the idle time of taxis. And there is a lot of idle time of taxis. So basically, customers buy a mobility flat rate for the price of a normal monthly travel card. You can basically have unlimited taxi travel in a city. You have to accept fellow travelers in taxis. Of course, this fosters communication, and sometimes you may have to make a detour. But in a few months' time, there will be the first test run in southern Germany. Another promising project in Germany is being tested in the city of Ulm. A car maker has basically distributed 200 mini cars in Ulm. The customers, the drivers, will get an electronic seal on their driver's license, and they hold that to the door, and they can then use the mini car, and if they don't need it anymore, they just park it anywhere. And there is an information system for billing, and there is a big demand for that, as among the citizens, creative rethinking has already started, as I can see. People try and find creative solutions. Things are going on already. Things have happened already, especially among young people in towns and cities. I have met young people, not yet the majority, I admit that, who don't even want to have a driving license anymore. They don't want to drive big SUVs anymore, and they don't see it as status symbols anymore, but see it as a nuisance. And lots of people who have similar thoughts look for solutions as well. There are initiatives in London, Oslo, Göttingen, and people have come together with the same thoughts and same ideas. How can we organize our cities in such a way that we are kind to the environmental resources and that we can lead a decent life? So, creativity of everybody is being called for in order to make progress, to have a better life. I think this is a great link of commitment on the parts of our citizens and worldwide networks. In many towns in the world, people start working like that, find fellow people, and are enthusiastic about this model, which makes life more worthwhile and makes for better living. So things have already started to move, and I'm convinced of that. Ladies and gentlemen, when we had the ash cloud in Europe crippling aviation, some people also reported good experiences. Some people might. One lady couldn't fly to her conference, so she made that presentation by video conferencing and was happy about the time she gained and about the additional time she could spend at the office and with her family. Another lady basically was switched on by video conferencing and went for a jog afterwards, and somebody else was relieved that she wouldn't have to go on holiday, on a strenuous holiday, and relaxed nearby and rediscovered her region. So let's jettison old habits. Let's ditch and query old habits. Let's look for new ways of mobility, which is not a privilege for now, and but which will be possible for everybody in the future as well. Mobility for which politicians have to create good framework conditions, and where entrepreneurs have to be ambitious in finding new solutions. Mobility which can be created by all their users. Mobility which brings together people and nations all over the world in an environmentally compatible way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Herr Bundespräsident, vielen Dank. Schade, dass Sie nicht.
Thank you very much, Federal President. It's a shame that you won't be here for the next discussions because you have delivered many topics and catchwords, but I can assure you that we will certainly go on discussing your message. So thank you.
As I do to returning to these very pleasant surroundings every year for the annual forum. And we have our host, Dr. Peter Ramsauer, to thank for this continuing hospitality. He took over the German transport portfolio just last year. Prior to that, he was a member of the Bundestag for 20 years. He holds a leading position in the Christian Social Union Party here in Germany, and as Germany's Federal Minister of Transport, he's responsible for unleashing the potential of a transport sector with a truly enviable reputation for quality. Welcome. May I ask you to take the podium?
Sehr geehrter, lieber Herr Bundespräsident,
Federal President, Mr. Merrifield, being the advising president from Canada, Jack Short, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, colleagues from different countries, I'm very pleased, and after 7 months in office as Federal Minister of Transport and Construction, it is a special honor to be here at this great conference in my role as your host in Leipzig and in Germany. It is quite a wonderful challenge to welcome more than 800 participants from more than 52 countries for the third time here in Leipzig. And in this context, I would like to welcome warmly the person who is responsible for this forum taken place in Leipzig, my predecessor as a Minister of Transport and Construction and former Lord Mayor of the city of Leipzig, my dear colleague Wolfgang Tiefensee, I would like to welcome you especially and warmly.
Meine Damen und Herren, die hohe
Ladies and gentlemen, the high number of participants and the fact that 52 countries are represented here shows the great interest in this forum. It is my personal wish as your host to make it possible for all countries that want to participate, and this is why I hope that in the next year Cyprus will be a participant as well as a member of the European Union. And hence I would like to call on our Turkish friends to make this possible in the future, because the problems of transport will have to be solved together despite our individual interests. Ladies and gentlemen, Albert Einstein once said, "It's insane to do the same thing over and over again while expecting different results." That means, to translate it to our present situation, that in view of a growing volume and traffic, in view of the finiteness of fossil fuels, and in view of all problems connected to global warming, we will have to find a different way. And in this context, Federal President, I would like to agree to all the points that you have made, for example, in relation to the internationalization of external costs, and in view of the question linked to that, how almost automatically some transport problems are solved up front because they don't fit in the whole cost calculation and do not show affordable prices anymore. It can be shown that we are too slow in this field by the fact that setting down external costs is so difficult when it comes to the environmental issues and the economic debate about clear and true costs. When I went to university 35 years ago, this was already one of my focal topics, and if I take a look at how many things have changed in academic theory over the past 35 years and what has changed in traffic and economic practice, then, Federal President, I have to state that in the past 35 years we have acknowledged the problem, but we have not achieved anything in real life, and this is why I would like to thank you for the points that you've made. Ladies and gentlemen, today, also before this background, we will deal with important topics such as electromobility as one of the essential global innovation path. For my country, for Germany, I also regard this as one of the key technologies that will open up immense economic fields for us. As a central and basic challenge for innovation, I would like to name the question of how we deal with an increased volume in freight traffic, and I am aware of the great role that rail traffic has to play. It is of utmost importance unless we want to see a collapse in traffic on our roads. We will need an immense number of new technologies in the area of traffic management. For Europe, I would like to name Galileo as a point, it is one of the essential innovation projects within the European Union that is used to organize and integrate our traffic systems in a better way and make them smarter. In Europe, we want to come up with an independent, reliable European satellite navigation system. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the volcanic ash clouds mentioned several times. Today I read in a newspaper that there is an international study evaluating the follow-up costs of the volcano eruption resulting from the collapse of air traffic, and the number they came up with was $5 billion. Working as an assistant scientist at university, I learned how to devise studies, how to do them correctly or incorrectly, and this is why I have my doubts regarding these figures. I assume, and that once again brings me back to your words, Federal President, that many positive factors were not included in the calculation and some points were exaggerated. Positive effects that the German railway company has seen an increase in turnover, that car rental services have seen an increase in turnover, and if you compensate the damages that airline companies have seen, then this would have to be included as well, and this gives the discussion a different term. But what I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, is we have a major international forum here, and many of you are members of the International Civil Aviation Organization. Until September, when ICAO will have its annual meeting, we hopefully will have managed to come up with standardized measurement systems and threshold values that serve as orientation and as a basis for action. In Europe, we are currently working on that, and there is something else I would like to add. It's not ministers of transport or governments that have grounded air traffic, but it was the volcano that caused the situation, and the discussion has gone haywire, and I think we have to focus on this fact. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I wish us for today's and tomorrow's discussion. I would like to welcome you as our international guests to my country, to the wonderful city of Leipzig, and I'm already looking forward to being your host in the years to come. I wish your conference every success. Welcome.
Ramsauer, you reminded us of the amazing international diversity present at this forum, coordinating all the priorities and interests and, yes, demands of dozens of nations makes the job of forum president, of course, more than a purely symbolic function. So we are especially grateful to Canada for taking on that job this year in 2010, and grateful to Rob Merrifield. He is Canada's Minister of State for Transport. He was a member of the House of Commons since 2000, headed the Interparliamentary Committee for Canada and the US, as well as the Finance Committee, and took on the transport portfolio in 2008. Welcome very much to you. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's my great privilege to be able to be here, President, fellow colleague ministers. It's wonderful to be able to preside over the 2010 International Transport Forum. I'm excited about being here today at the forum because this is your day. This is a day for the decision makers. And in this room you'll find experts from across and around the world who know what the problems are, who have identified the problems, and who also have many solutions to those problems. And so I encourage us all to be able to take this opportunity, take the opportunity that you have today to be able to dialogue, discuss, discern how to make our economies better, how to make society better, how to make our environment better, as the President has suggested. We know that innovation is the key to that. And we also know that it will create productivity in all of our countries. Last year at this time, we were in a bad state. We were into a world recession. No one knew how deep it was going to go. No one knew how long it was going to last. Those were very much unknowns. We're still a little uncertain, but we're seeing some very positive signs. But we have to move from a stimulated economy that we've seen over the last year, year and a half, to a long-term prosperity economy that is driven by innovation and real sustainable growth. That'll be our challenge. It's interesting from global national challenges that come in many forms. Infrastructure must be renewed and modernized. Congestion must be balanced and reduced. We seek greener ways to move people and freight, and we have to make sure that we do actually reduce the greenhouse emissions and air pollution. And if anyone has the solutions and the innovation to be able to shut down a volcano, I wish they would speak quickly, and we would get on with that. We have to do it with understanding that gas prices and fuel prices are going to rise, and the demographic and the aging demographics of our population will continue to age, and that will add pressure to our economy. So there are many problems out there. We know that we can have that there are some solutions that are in the works as well, and we know that if we take the blinders off, that we will get there. It's interesting when you think of innovation. I remember when I was 8 years old, I was sitting in a classroom and I was thinking, how unfortunate it was that I was, born later. I wished I was born earlier so that I could be part of the inventions that were taking place. I mean, there was a microwave oven, there was a calculator, there was all sorts of, the television was there, colored. There was nothing left for me to do. And later I realized that I was thinking too small and that there's much left to do. But one thing that we all know and can appreciate is that the only thing that really is certain in today's world, in today's society, is that change is a norm, and we have to accept that. We know that technology can help in many, many different ways. We know that it can make our roads and vehicles, our aircrafts, our trains, and our ships more efficient, more safe, and more clean. We know that technology, such as the intelligence transportation system, can be a tremendous asset. We know that it can help with congestions, with road safety. We know that it can improve the overall performance of our transportation systems. We know that with proper monitoring we can track cargo containers, whether by ship, by truck, by train, or by plane. We know that technology has improved our airport security with better X-ray equipment, with better full-body scanners that have added layers, with new explosive equipment detection that has come in this last year, that a couple of years, that has really improved the different layers of protection that we have against terrorism that we all are cautious of. It's our responsibility as decision makers to be able to respond. We don't look back, we look ahead. We have to look ahead, and we have to seize those opportunities. It's very difficult because part of my portfolio is looking after the post office. We're animals of habit. If you've ever been a politician and moved a post office box from one location to another, you realize that that's a reality. People reject change. We kind of get stuck in a rut. And you know what a rut is? Rut is really a comfortable place, a place that keeps you sort of on a track, but it really is just a grave with the ends kicked out. That's what a rut is. And we have to make sure that we push back against the status quo, that we look beyond what is and look at our possibilities, what we can actually achieve. We do that through a number of ways, and as parliamentarians, politicians, we have to make sure that we we work at our partnerships. We understand that working together we'll get to where we need to go. We're not in isolation. Every one of us are either part of a solution, and every player in that part or part of the problem. We have an example in Canada with the Asian Pacific Gateway, where we've worked very hard at putting those partners together on the West Coast to be able to make sure that we move containers more quickly, that we move freight more quickly. In the middle of the recession last year, just to give you an example how effective it was, we increased container cargo shipments 46% in the middle of the worst recession since the 30s. How did we do that? We did it by putting everyone together, all of the governments, of the government levels, all of the orders of government, the port authorities, the trucking, the rail industry, the shippers, the suppliers, and the customers, all together working to accomplish one goal, a seamless transportation system. And it was working. It worked so effectively, we're going to do it on the Atlantic coast, and we're going to do it in central Canada as well. Because we know that we can do it if we work together. In Canada, we don't hold the patent on ideas. We know that there are many of the ideas in many countries, many examples around the world have some wonderful things that we can add and learn from today. I'll give you a few examples. The United States can give us a tremendous amount of intelligence on their transportation system, the research they're doing, making it safer, smarter, and greener. We know that countries such as Japan, the Republic of Korea can lead in the international, in the ITS, International Transportation System, as well as in innovation. We know that China has lots to add with regard to high-speed rail and their subway systems. We know the United Kingdom has advanced low-carbon transportation strategy. We know that the European Union has the 7th framework policy on research and technology development. So we come to this forum. We have some examples of what we can do, and we need to. That's one of the reasons that we support this forum in Canada. That's why you are here. It's because you know that this is a forum where we can collectively find best practices and discern how we can apply those to our respective countries, and how we can make sure that we as decision makers move forward. Lots has changed in our society the last while. The advent of the internet has been revolutionary. Yesterday morning we heard a speaker from China suggesting that the electric car was also going to be revolutionary. And who knows what is coming at us. What we do know is change is coming at us. I know that the BlackBerry, a good Canadian invention, although some of it developed in Germany, has revolutionized politics. Because I don't know if there are many people in the room that doesn't have one. It is actually very interesting what technology can actually do. I know one thing, that we have a day ahead of us where we can sit down and talk about those kinds of problems, those kinds of innovation. I'm one who believes that there are lots of problems in the world, and we can find naysayers, there are a dime a dozen. But I believe that if we embrace technology, if we unleash our potential, that our best days are yet to be achieved. And I wish you the very best as you try to seize that potential today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that optimistic outlook as we move toward our first discussions. But before we do, I'm sorry to say that President Köhler is going to be leaving us now. We're very, very glad to have had him with us. I may say thank you, I think, on all of our behalf to the President. Herr Bundespräsident, es war wirklich eine Ehre, dass Sie heute bei uns waren. Und wir wünschen Ihnen...
Federal President, it indeed was an honor to have you among us, and we wish you a safe trip back to Berlin. Goodbye.
Before I introduce our next keynote, just a brief word about the rest of the morning's proceedings. As you know, our topic is unleashing potential, and to be sure that your potential stays unleashed, you will have a coffee break after our first discussion. There's plenty of coffee and tea out there. That will be at about 11:30. But we are going to ask you to return promptly by 12, if you would please, because we do have another very meaty discussion with us after the break. And at 1:30 we will then break for lunch. For those of you who have invitations to the minister's lunch, you should please remain here. You will get further instruction about that. So that's just a brief hint about what is in store. Well, our first panel this morning is entitled The Global Transport System of the Future. And so it's particularly fitting that to introduce it, and before we go on, we have a keynote from one of the world's leading futurologists. As director of the James Martin 21st Century School at the University of Oxford, Ian Goldin has the rather awesome task, together with those who work at the school, of coming up with technologies and concepts and processes whose mission is quite simply to make the future a better place to be. That's what the school's website says it's dedicated to, and it sounds simple, but I think, in fact, it's a pretty tall order. Ian Goldin was previously vice president of the World Bank. He has also worked with the development banks of Europe and Southern Africa. And the most recent of his numerous books is Globalization for Development, which has been absolutely heralded by the world press. And I must say, from what I've read of it, it's quite inspiring. So we're very, very pleased to have you with us today, Dr. Goldin, and looking forward to your remarks. May I ask you to take the podium?
Thanks for those kind words. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you, Your Excellencies, ministers, friends, some thoughts on the future. I've got 15 minutes to talk about 90 years, so forgive me if I accelerate and don't cover everything. But I want to provide some provocative stimulation, which I hope will help you as we think about these very tough issues. The one thing we know about the future is that we always get it wrong. The best minds, with the best databases, the best institutions, public and private, aren't able to see what's coming across the horizon. And we know this from industry, we know this from intelligence agencies, and of course we know it from international organizations, as the IMF famously 6 months before this recent crisis said all was well. Of course, the OECD does a much better job, and I am proud to have spent some of my years there. But why is it that people who devote themselves to thinking about the future are increasingly, I would suggest, unable to think about it? And what do we do about it as we are planning for the future? We are investing in infrastructure which will be there for at least 50 years. And I want to suggest that what we need to understand is not a predictive ability, but some of the big structural trends. And as we think about these structural trends, to be able to ensure that the decisions we take as ministers, the decisions we take as investors in technology, are informed by some of these very big changes. Now, biggest amongst these are systemic changes which are happening in the world, and which, of course, this city, this fascinating city of Leipzig and this part of Germany were so transformed by. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the opening up of China, the ending of dictatorships across much of Latin America, Africa and Asia, the Maastricht Treaty, these are seismic shifts. Together with the transformations in economic policy, the transformations of macro, of trade coming out of the Uruguay round, the structural adjustment policies, the shocks of the 1990s, the economic transformation which has led to economic integration, and of course the technologies that have gone with this, the internet, fiber optics, containerization, and the others. Together, these are a tidal wave of globalization. There's a type of change happening, a type of integration which is unprecedented in human history. This connectiveness this ability for an action in one place to connect somewhere else is the integration of globalization, which has brought unprecedented prosperity to the world. This is the best news we have known, and the problem for most countries is not that they're too globalized, but that they're not globalized enough. This is a period unlike any in human history. It's a period that we saw briefly about 1,000 years ago when Islamic and Christian civilizations came together. It's a period of renaissance, a period of innovation because of our connectivity. That is why we are more innovative than ever before, because we are leapfrogging by getting ideas that it took generations of people to form in other places. And as more children get educated, as more people come together, this will go further. There is more genius unleashed in the world now than ever before in human history, and that is a cause for huge opportunity. It means that progress is happening at a more rapid pace, and so over this period of the tidal wave of globalization, since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the many other things I indicated, there has been this leap. With life expectancy at birth on average increasing by 20 years, it took from the Stone Age to achieve that average improvement in life expectancy. With illiteracy going down, with income per capita going up virtually everywhere. So this is good news. It gives us the hope that we are able to enjoy the benefits of globalization and share them widely. But there is, of course, an underbelly. The underbelly is the systemic risk that comes from integration. The underbelly is that integration also means interdependence. It is also because, as the President said in his visionary speech, we don't appreciate the externalities. We don't price in the costs of this integration, and those are growing very rapidly. Population growth over the next 40 years or so, even this is very unstable. We used to think demography was amongst the easiest of those parts of the future to understand. We now know it's just as unpredictable as everything else. I actually think we're going to be having a population which hovers below 9 billion people. And that's because there are two key drivers, and the driver of fertility decline is more powerful. Of course, this will vary dramatically by region, but all regions except Africa are likely to have declining populations by about 20 to 30 years' time. Of course, this will be highly urbanized, growing to about 70% from the 50% we have now. Now, thinking about these two key drivers, what really matters is how long we live and how many people are being born. The amazing story on life expectancy is this leap that we've experienced and this convergence around the world. While you're here for these 3 days, your life expectancy will increase by about 40 minutes. This is a very productive meeting. Now, this is both due to the technologies as well as the ideas, the public health ideas, us understanding that smoking causes cancer, that wearing seat belts is better, as well as the very, very fascinating technological improvements. I actually think we'll be seeing new leaps. We work in Oxford with fantastic scientists working on the frontiers in many areas, including medicine. And the stem cell, the genetic and other technologies are indeed, I think, a cause of great optimism. But more dramatic than the story on longevity is that of the collapse of fertility. This has been unprecedented as well. And so if you go to Shanghai, as President Köhler recently has, and you ask the mayor what the fertility and life expectancy rates are, it's truly astounding. Life expectancy for newborns is approaching 90, and fertility is well below 1. You drive this through, and you begin to understand the social, economic, and other implications. So we have this situation where within 20 years, only Africa is above replacement level, rapidly transforming what we imagine to be the population pyramids of society into population coffins around the world. Now, note too the very significant gender disparities, which will lead to a further vicious circle. So the sorts of dynamics that we think are European are in fact global. The whole world will be experiencing these, and the only solution for countries in many respects is, of course, the one that the US and certain other countries have discovered, which is allow more migrants in with higher levels of fertility. This is a much healthier beehive sort of structure. But we really need to worry, those of us that are around my age, about who's going to be paying our pensions, who's going to be pushing us around in our wheelchairs when we get older, because certainly the burden on the youth will become unsupportable. And of course this has very significant implications for where we will live, how we will live, and our transport systems. Now, in Asia alone, there will be over 700 million people over the age of 65 by the year 2025, around our corner, with dramatic implications for the type of transport they will be using, but also their time, because many of them will have incomes which allow them to travel, to engage in pastimes, which will greatly increase the tourism and other demands. Migration will begin to make up some of this shortfall, but even if migration levels were 5 times the current levels, they would still not change this basic demographic story as the workforce in the rich countries, if retirement doesn't change, goes down. Of course, retirement will change. I believe that our concepts of retirement and pensions will soon become redundant as the fiscal and other pressures, as well as our health and our willingness and interest in continuing to work, transforms. Economic growth is likely to be very robust. The story that we've seen over the last 20 years, where basically emerging markets have learnt the lessons that we've been telling them from the international organizations, we unfortunately in the rich countries haven't listened, and so we have this inverted situation where emerging markets will grow at 3, 4, 5 times the levels of the rich countries. Massive ripple through, of course, to all transport and growth systems. Driving behind a lot of these things is the new technologies. Moore's law, which suggests that the power of computing will double every 18 months, he said that in the 60s, continues to be not only robust, but to be even stronger than he imagined, because he also thought it would peter out after a couple of generations of improvement. The computer scientists we speak to suggest not only an increasing continuation of this, but a steepening of the curve, and so it will be that in 20 years' time or so, our portable devices should be about 1 million times more powerful than what we have now for the same price. And you have to begin to ask what you get with that, what do you do with this. And you have ubiquitous extreme computing in the same way that our kids' PlayStation 3s or other games are more powerful than Deep Blue, the most powerful computer in the world 12 years ago. So this is what you get when you roll these through with immense potential. A lot of the question of whether we're able to use these technologies depends on our ability as a collective community to come together. This is the Aral Sea, where I worked with President Köhler when we were at the EBRD together on trying to stop the collapse of this ocean. We were not successful. Will we be more successful on climate change? Will we be able to do enough, quick enough? Will we be able to realize that collective action is what is needed? We've done it on the Mediterranean, of course, where METUP has been an astounding success. But we're convinced in Oxford that climate change is real, that it's going to be dramatic and likely to be at the top end of these sorts of IPCC curves, because we're doing too little too late. But even for those skeptics that believe that climate change is not real, I would suggest that even if there's a 5% probability it's real, it's worth taking these actions in the same way we insure our homes against fire and our societies against other risks. We have a military not because we believe we will go to war, but because we believe we do not want to go to war. And even for the skeptics, I would suggest action now in a big way, much bigger than we're doing, is necessary. This means, as the President has indicated, behavior change. How do we come down to 2 tons per capita? The demands are dramatic. As you see, Germany close to 10. Many of the richest societies are, while allowing the poor countries to have their right to development, which we have so enjoyed the benefits of. Transport has an absolutely key role to play in this. It's a role which this conference so well is focusing on. But how do we get these sorts of changes in primary consumption fast enough? Major changes will be needed not only in technology, but of course in legislation, in regulation, in pricing, which must go with it. Oil prices are speculative, of course, in nature. We believe the underlying trend is up, but we are not, or I personally certainly am not, a believer in peak oil. I hope, and I believe is absolutely necessary, that we get off oil and our habit on it well before the peak comes. Much depends on how the vehicle sales and other transport sales will play through and what sort of vehicles. You know this data which has been so well produced by this forum over time. Thinking about the consequences of these graphs is absolutely vital. Whether it's going to be the more pessimistic, weak economy, or the upper scenarios, the implications of this for the transport sector's contribution to climate change are very, very difficult to accept and will lead to backlashes in many ways. So we have this challenge of rapidly increasing populations, economic activity, which I've indicated, shared widely around the world, and we need to reduce carbon emissions by at least 15 times in order to achieve this in a way which is both equitable in terms of the opportunity as well as environmentally effective. It can be done. This is a vehicle we're developing in Oxford. That's my 14-year-old son in it. We have the means. We just need to make sure that these can be widely rolled out. We need to be able to do this much more rapidly. You are working in many ways, as one sees, walking around the stalls outside in these areas. So pushing pressure behind this, ensuring that we accelerate through a competitive environment in terms of technologies, but also a regulatory environment which recognizes the externalities associated with carbon is absolutely vital in the short term. It can be done in all areas of transport. There are some, of course, which are more difficult. Aviation and shipping, particularly, have a long, long way to go. That's also car developing in Oxford with Morgan to try and prove that you can go faster on non-carbon than with carbon, which of course you can. These future design concepts have a way to go. They have a behavior change to go, but it must be done. Aviation is going to be difficult. It's again an area where strong government interventions are going to be required, with more capacity and, of course, issues like straightening out lines of flight. But we know, again, and there's a demonstration of this outside, that their technologies are evolving fast. The problem is we are locked in to 30 or 40-year-old technologies. And so how do we move this fast enough now becomes the question. This is an exciting conference because many of you are working in these different areas. The pressure is to do as much as possible now, and I'm delighted to be able to be part of this. At Oxford, we have about 400 academics working across the different areas thinking about the future. And I do hope that we will be able to work with you in order to ensure that we can do more and more quickly. Thank you.
Dr. Goldin, thank you very much. A lot of input there for our continuing discussions going on. And perhaps I can start out by saying to our policy-making panelists, you do have Dr. Goldin's sympathy. He points out in his book, Globalization for Development, that infrastructure decisions are some of the most complex and sensitive decisions that a policymaker has to meet. The transport sector is potent proof of Dr. Goldin's thesis that rising interdependence through globalization is heightening the risks that we all face, and that to meet them we are going to need to cooperate. Transport is at the very center not only of the challenge of climate change, but also dwindling fossil fuels, urbanization, congestion, security, to name just a few. Transport is part of the problem, but of course, conversely, that means it's also part of the solution. Innovation will be absolutely crucial to unleashing the transport system's potential to meet those challenges and to find solutions. And to quote Ian Goldin once more, It will take a nuanced understanding of the sensitive interplay between state and markets in order to maximize that potential. And that's why the ITF has put together for you 2 panels today in which state meets market, so to speak. We'll hear from some particularly forward-looking policymakers about how they envisage the transport system of the future. And we're going to be hearing from some very impressive industry leaders about what policy innovations they believe are necessary to help maximize technical and process and institutional innovation. So now I'd like to ask each panelist to please come to the stage. As I call your name, you will find, yes, indeed, you will find your name on one of the seats. So if you would be so kind, please, as to take those seats when I call off your names. And we'll start with Germany's Minister of Transport, Peter Ramsauer. Please, if I may ask you to take the stage. Camiel Eurlings is the outgoing Minister of Transport, Public Works and Water Management of the Netherlands. Welcome. Moritz Leuenberger is Switzerland's head of Switzerland's Federal Department of the Energy, Transport, Environment and Communications. Welcome to you. Robin Chase is CEO of Meadow Networks, which advises government agencies about wireless applications in the transport sector. And she is also the founder of GoLoCo and Zipcar, which is the largest car-sharing company in the world. Cyrille Peloux has been CEO of Veolia Transport since 2007. He is also a member of the Executive Committee of Veolia Environnement. Welcome. Andreas Renschler has been a member of the Board of Management of Daimler AG since 2004, and he is head of Daimler's Trucks Division. Hello. Hermann is CEO of DHL Global Forwarding and Freight, and he is a member of the Board of Management of Deutsche Post. Thanks for being with us. And finally, Katsuaki Watanabe is Vice Chairman and Representative Director of Toyota Motor Corporation. We're very glad you could be here today. And Mr. Watanabe, I would like to start off with you. Ian Goldin has just outlined for us the degree to which innovation must go far beyond technical invention, must encompass really systemic change. So what does that mean for you car makers? Are you in future going to have to become a whole lot more than auto guys?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Watanabe. I'm from Toyota Motor Corporation. It is my greatest pleasure to be here this morning as part of such an important forum. Taking this opportunity, I'd like to share my thoughts on how the future transport system should be and what is needed to make it happen, primarily from automotive perspectives. The automobile, by dramatically expanding human and freight mobility, has brought about significant well-being and wealth to the human society. As today, in 2007, worldwide, there were 950 million units of vehicles in operation. Due to the strong demand from emerging markets, this number will only continue to grow at the even faster pace. And according to IEA, it is projected to reach 1.8 billion units by 2030. However, I think it's very much important to just the current numbers just to continue to grow. And then what should we do? For automobile, I think we have to focus on the environment, energy, and peace of mind and safety as our top priority issues, so that in spite of the increase of the number of vehicles, we must realize dramatic reduction of CO2 and energy savings, and thereby build a world of sustainable mobility where people can live safely and with peace of mind. I think it is very much important, and it's very much important part of our mission. Otherwise, I think that there is no future for the automotive industry. And today, I'd like to suggest 4 components which I think are necessary to make this scenario happen. First is the innovations from the vehicle side. For the next 10 years, we will see both the conventional vehicles and the next generation vehicles which aims at reducing oil dependency coexisting side by side in each country or region. Therefore, car manufacturers, including Toyota, are developing various technologies in parallel so that we can deliver the right car in the right place at the right time. And such efforts consist of, number 1, oil savings to cope with the imminent threat of peak oil. And secondly, the use of alternative fuels to reduce oil dependency. While energy savings can be achieved by the efficiency improvement through vehicle weight and size reductions, as well as engine and transmission improvement, and oil dependency reduction requires development of next-generation vehicles which can run on biofuels, natural gas, electricity, hydrogen, and so forth. And also the new kind of power plant that can run on those fuels, and also the hybrid must also be developed. However, for the next-generation vehicles to be viable products, there are many technological issues that we have to solve. Development of the cellulose-based biofuels that don't compete with the food requirement, significant performance improvement of the batteries for EV, building networks of hydrogen and electricity stations, and the list goes on and on. To overcome these hurdles, government, industry, academia collaboration is a must, and also for those next-generation vehicles to be mainstreamed, government aggressive support will be required, I believe. The second point or the component is a traffic flow. Improved traffic flow is indispensable for the sake of both environment and safety. One of the solutions we can find is ITS utilization. For example, if the average vehicle speed increases from 30 km per hour to 40 km per hour through traffic flow improvement, fuel economy will increase by 10%. And also for the safety, vehicle-to-vehicle communication or the infrastructure-to-vehicle communication can greatly contribute to the realization of mobility that offers safety and peace of mind. And according to some data, we can halve the accident rates by utilizing such kind of technologies. So road infrastructure and ICT evolution that are needed for this component must be secured through public and private partnership. And third point or the component is a town planning. Sustainable society starts with sustainable town planning. The so-called smart community and eco-town concepts must be put into reality as soon as possible. Such low-carbon society with safety and peace of mind prerequisites sustainable mobility. We must start thinking how to optimize means of transportation for a particular town by taking into consideration local factors such as environment, energy situations, and the local lifestyle, and so forth. More specifically, road differentiation between public transportation and the private cars depending on purposes, or choosing the best next-generation vehicles depending on trip distances, and infrastructure building. One interesting idea is to connect cars to smart grid and use their onboard batteries as a distributed power storage system for solar panels on the roof. Already, many demonstration projects, including ecotown initiatives, are underway or being planned in various countries. We are hoping that we can get feedback from those demonstration projects so that we can put them into reality as soon as possible. Thus far, I have indicated that the world of sustainable mobility requires changes, not only the part of the cars, but also the changes in traffic towns. The fourth component is regarding how we should proceed. The answer is cooperation in following four domains. One, within the automotive sectors, and secondly, across industrial sectors. For example, we have to involve the material industries and also the electronics industries as well. And third is a government industry and academia cooperation in the form of a strategic national project. And fourthly, the global cooperation in the areas of international standardization. By having such kind of the cooperation in four domains, I'm sure that the issues will be solved eventually. As a car manufacturer, we are firmly determined to make our best efforts to build a world of sustainable mobility. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Mr. Watanabe mentioned challenges like congestion and urbanization. Robin Chase, what do you see as the most promising innovations for meeting those? Your mic is on your table, should be.
I don't have one. The most promising, I think, has to do with sharing fractional cars. Earlier today, we were discussed urbanization and congestion, and are these frightening things, or is it a boon or a bust? I think we should see it as a boon, that these aren't frightening words but joyful ones, because when people live in dense urban areas, this prediction for 1.8 billion cars, I think, will be dramatically lower. We can't park that number of cars in these dense urban cities that we do today. Therefore, people will want fractions of cars. I think people are very rational, and the cost of parking those cars and the cost of congestion that we'll be seeing, no matter, and let's hope that we have zero CO2 emissions, will be very high costs, meaning that when people travel, they will be choosing in the city. Most of their travel will not be done by a car, so therefore they will want to own a fraction of a car, and this is where car sharing is really a very promising thing, that we're able to have a fraction of car usage rather than a whole one. The company I founded, Zipcar, which is the largest car sharing company in the world, has proven that for each shared vehicle, the demand for cars is reduced by 10 to 20 cars for each shared car. So it's a dramatic reduction. When you think of that 1.8 billion, the fraction of those people who live in cities who don't need cars to get to work will choose definitely to be using shared vehicles rather than own vehicles. But I feel more promising than that reduction of cars per capita is the change in driving distances that these people who share cars choose to make. If you have your own car that's parked downstairs, all of those costs associated with the car, the maintenance, depreciation, insurance, all of that is behind you, and you think the trip is just the fuel costs. When people share cars, all of that price is very overt and variable, and they see it very vividly. So they're paying by the hour. What we find is that people choose to drive 70% smaller distances when they're paying by the hour than otherwise. So if we think of these gains, that we are reducing the number of vehicles needed for a specific population, and then we have the 70% reduction of distance traveled because of the price being very overt. So if I think of policy issues, today, we have built our infrastructure. When we think of what's required for an office development or a housing development, is that we have in our minds imagined that there's one car per adult, or in a household that we would have one car per household, and therefore we have parking that is required in this way. The insurance and liability has all been built around this idea that there would be one owner who is owning one car. We need to change that with the imagination that in the future we will be separating car ownership and car liability from the driver, and similarly the housing and infrastructure requirements should not be bundled with these cars. And the last point I'd like to make is that technology is the enabler. Technology is the only way that we can have many, many people using very small fractions of cars, and that I, as an individual, are willing to entertain that. So getting at technology that is in vehicles, open technologies, and to imagine these cars as part of a much larger technology grid will be critical to the future.
Moritz, Leuenberger, you wanted to jump in there. You are reportedly not a person who takes a car to work.
Der Einstieg in diese Diskussion zeigt eine Realität.
Well, the introduction into discussion shows a reality, and the reality is that transport policy as a whole and mobility behavior as a whole is controlled by private companies, by the automotive industry. And it's quite strange that we discuss a transport policy future with a statement by a car maker followed by a very, very good organization that deals with minimizing the results of the car industry on the environment. And me, as a minister of the environment and transport, I have to say that our ideals are fine, very well. They've been outlined in the presentations and speeches. Of course, it would be sensible to use the train for distances of 600 kilometers and the plane only from that distance on, or to do car sharing in urban conglomerations. We know how slow traffic is supposed to work, but we never succeed in realizing it. Maybe we have in small points in Switzerland, but it can only come off if all our neighbors, if all the countries in the world join in. We live in liberal democracies, and we do not want to suppress people's will to move like dictators. We want to help them to achieve what they want to do, but we want to find a politically responsible way for mobility. And with every switch or change to, for example, an electric car, we have to ask ourselves, where does the energy come from? From a coal-fired power plant with high CO2 emissions? Well, then at the end of the day, we haven't won anything. And we realize that the industry has become globalized, but the political side of it has not. And I hope that Leipzig here is a beginning. We start putting certain regulations in place, but instead of technologies and mobility systems being adapted to each other, which would be a first step, there has to be a second step, that transport policy as such is globalized as well. And this would be the only way to achieve an overall approach, because otherwise it will remain controlled by the automotive industry.
Of road to rail in the freight area, but perhaps let's stay now for the time being with personal transport, with the impulse toward mobility that you just talked about, and ask you, Cyrille du Peloux, your country says that your company says that it is dedicated to offering a coordinated, smooth, interlocking transportation system. In other words, making use of the kind of coordination that Robin Chase was just saying is essential. Tell us a little bit more, please, about what it is you're doing and what innovations you're relying on to do it.
So we are a mobility provider, not dedicated to one mode of transport, but to provide mobility solutions. We see across the world, because we are working in more than 30 countries, that there is a request for both more global mobility, integrated intermodal mobility, but also individual solutions, because everyone has to go from one end to the other end of the trip, which means that he needs more choice to optimize its trip and to have a useful time during the trip. So on the local authority side, it requires more coordination on larger territories and a clear view of where are the main structuring lines, and rail will play a bigger role, of course, in that, but also to structure the interchange hubs, which will become like airports in order to connect all type of mobilities. And on the local authority side, it requires to have also a clear and close link between planning and transport decisions, because it's very important also to optimize the public space, which is congestion. On our side, private company, we want to be able to integrate all the pieces which are required in a given territory. And it requires expertise in the various modes, but it also includes smart mobility. It means that the first, probably the most important, is to provide all information to each individual through the mobile phone or through the smartphone, for example, because each individual has to know how to optimize its trip. So what we are providing on top of the transport solution itself, we are providing the tools for integration, which are mobility centers and smartphone solutions, e-ticketing on the mobile phone or this type of things. But we need also innovation not only in technical matters like electromobility, and we see that electromobility will be more and more important even for cars and even in terms of car sharing. But we need also innovation in terms of contractual framework, in terms of organization of local authorities, in terms of social and training issues. And this is what we are providing throughout our company.
Ramdes, you wanted?
I want to add that this panel is comprised, and as we discuss, we are under the impression, the old status quo way of thinking is that there are only two groups that will solve our transportation problem, governments or big businesses. And I think we need to imagine putting more tools in the hands of smaller individuals. If we think of developing countries today, they are very entrepreneurial in the transportation sector, and they fill many niches. So people give rides to other people, they take other people in their cars, they lend their cars to other people, they help each other, and that we in the more developed countries have completely knocked that out as a possibility, and we have codified who's allowed to give who rides, who can take money. And as we go forward, I think we need to make special dispensations and set-asides for small volume transportation solutions, and that those don't have the same safety issues, that when I give someone a ride, it doesn't instantly turn me into a bus service or RATP. I'm just a person giving someone a ride once a week. I don't need to have those types of rules. And so similarly around ownership, again, I don't turn it into a bus if I take some money. So that we need to imagine and enable people in the distributed world in which we live now and will continue to live to fulfill small niche markets throughout this whole distribution.
One link, perhaps, though, between those small providers and the big ones like Veolia is the question of information. Clearly, to be part of a car-sharing scheme, I have to know where cars are available and when. Now, Veolia's mobility centers, as I understand it, Monsieur de Peloux, include some really cutting-edge attempts at vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-hub technology. I'd like to go to you now, Minister Eurlings. One of these mobility centers is in Maastricht, in your country, relying very heavily on cutting-edge IT technologies. Are those kind of innovations going to be crucial in promoting the sort of coordination that we need to meet our CO2 reduction and other goals?
Oh yes, I think that these kind of initiatives can play a major role. One of the big mistakes that we as politicians sometimes make is that we portray one modality to be much better than the other, and so we are starting a political fight: who is the best for public transport, who is the most against mobility on the roads. And I think that The problem of these kind of concepts is they do not align with the everyday reality of our citizens. People need to move, and if we want to have a successful environmental policy, we should not go against transport. We should, of course, make transport more environment conscious. Many people want to make the right choice. If you look at people, then it is very good to try to combine the modes of transport. We can win many more people for public transport if we try to combine them. So what are we doing now? We are investing a lot in information. When people can see, hey, if I take my car, but then change to a train for a part of my trip, I'm sooner at my destination than if I would continue in my car and go into a huge traffic jam. That creates a lot of change in choices. Real-time information in the car with a kind of device. But then public and private need to work together to exchange this information. We are building it up. Secondly, we are investing a lot in parking lots at train stations because people like the combination. They have to go from house to work, not from station to station. And there, partly with your car, partly with public transport, makes public transport a winner. We are even creating train stations outside of the cities. When people come from a rural area, they go into the more congested part of the country, they can leave the highway, go straight into a parking lot and take the train for that more congested part of our country. We need to think of these kind of concepts, but then information is key. If you allow me to make one more remark. I was very much fond of what was said in making the costs of mobility in the car a variable cost and not a cost when you buy a car. I think this is key. When you buy a car these days, in my country, you pay way too much tax. You pay like 40-something% on top of the normal price of the car when you buy the car. You pay a huge amount of money every month that you own the car, whether you use it or not. And there are two consequences. Once you have paid this horribly expensive car, you will use it. And second, the train is not a good competitor, because when you buy a train ticket, you pay all the variable costs per kilometer. So once you have the car, the train is not a good choice. What we have to do, I think, is reduce these fixed taxes and create systems where people pay for every kilometer they drive with their car. If we then use the fiscal instrument as well to differentiate for the environmental aspects, I think you can really drive the change. We tried it. We really greened our car park by reducing the taxes strongly for those cars that have a very, a little CO2 emission. And we also managed, it's good to see the president of Toyota here, we managed to really boost new technologies like hybrid cars. When you buy a hybrid car, you almost don't pay any tax. We are going to a new system where you have to pay for every kilometer you drive, and all the other taxes will be taken out. In that system, these very environment-friendly cars will almost pay nothing per driven kilometer. And that is a very huge drive for people to make the right choices when they buy a car. So I think there we should really align our policies, not be against the car or pro a train, green all of the mobility of the modes of transport, but within every mode strongly incentivize people to make the right, the more green choice.
A strong warning there from Camiel Eurlings not to privilege one particular technology or one particular mode. Peter Ramsauer, if you read a lot of what my colleagues in the press are saying, you would think that the electric car is the option for the future. There's a very, very strong emphasis on the media. You could say a bit of hype as well. We heard in your earlier remarks about how the German government is quite interested in this technology. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing. And do you see a risk of what we call picking the winner?
Natürlich.
Of course, us in Germany, as far as the German federal government is concerned, in every respect, we intensively focus on electric mobility. What do I mean by that? This is we bank on an electric mobility where the technology is still open. So what I refer to is battery-driven as well as hydrogen fuel cell technology. So here we focus on that for a number of reasons. Especially as we believe that with electric mobility, environmental damage can be mitigated and we can grapple with environmental challenges. So electric mobility is one option. However, there are clear limits. Our realistic target in Germany is to have 1 million electric vehicles on our roads in 10 years' time. That is our aim. However, that will only account for 1/45 of the vehicle fleet. As in 10 years' time in Germany, we will have 45 million vehicles on our roads. I say that so that you don't accuse me of some euphoric hype. 1 million sounds like a lot, but you have to know what it means, what the bottom line is, and what the upshot is of those ambitious aims. And there is another thing to the truth. The future will not just belong to electric vehicles. I'm sure that in 10 years' time and in 20 years' time, there will still be vehicles using the traditional combustion engine, and they will not just be being driven, but also being engineered. Over the last 30 years, there has been a sea change and technical revolution for the combustion engine. When I got my first car as a 19-year-old, this was a Volkswagen Beetle, 1,200 cubic centimeters, and it used, or consumption was 15 liters of petrol. My daughters at the same age got their first car, so exactly the same, one generation later, if you like, and the consumption is 4.5 liters only. So from 15 liters down to 4.5, that's a revolution. Would have been unthinkable when I was young. And I'm sure the specialist will have a say as well, that we will get down from those 4.5 liters as well. So what we want to achieve and have to achieve with electric mobility, we can achieve that as well by further revolutionizing the combustion engine. What is special in Germany, or a German peculiarity? I'm asked very often whether we Germans are not lagging far behind as far as electric mobility is concerned. The Chinese have been in the vanguard for batteries, the French for charging systems, and us Germans in other fields. I'm not worried at all that we will not be able to come up to those challenges. We have a top-drawer automotive industry. That we are lagging behind as far as batteries are concerned. We are to blame, or have ourselves to blame, but as far as electric vehicles are concerned, this is to do with the fact how you build cars. Car making as such is something where we Germans are very good at, and we will be able to do that very well for electric vehicles as well. Another aspect is safety. German car makers see safety as key. And basically, safety is one of our hallmarks, and safety in road traffic is key. Also, as far as my own policies are concerned, over the last 40 years, the number of road fatalities in relation to growth of vehicle traffic has been reduced by 15 times. So, down to a 15th of previous the number of road fatalities. So, there has been some huge success here. We are in competition with others, not just with other countries, but also with other car makers. So, we in Germany work intensively on those new technologies. The government is subsidizing that, is fostering that. For battery technology, there are 200 model projects at the moment, And as far as hydrogen fuel cell technology is concerned, there are 150 projects at the moment. At the moment, we are spending, this year we will spend 2 billion euros on research and development in that field. So part of that money comes from the corporate world as well. So we are sure that the first electric production cars as a mass offering will be marketable in 2 or 3 years' time.
I'd like to move beyond the question of personal transport now and talk about the other sector that we have so ably represented on our panel, namely logistics and freight. We mentioned a moment ago the role that information will play as an innovation in helping the transport sector to meet the various challenges we've outlined. Andreas Renschler, you have said in the past that you think some efficiency gains can be accomplished in trucking through additional IT technologies, but that it's no substitute for building better infrastructure. Is that still your view?
Basically, yes. I think, IT or efficiency gains in logistic companies, we always see a lot of movement in the right direction through IT and other things. But this is not helping the overall situation. The overall situation means in all technologies, and I'm with the minister here, we will see a lot of different technology. There is no silver bullet that we have a solution and it is running for everything. So we will have electronic mobility in the car sector, but can you think about a big construction truck that is using an electrical engine? It will not happen. So we need biofuel, for example, we need natural gas, we need a lot of future innovations also if the normal engines are concerned. So we need a wide range to come up with solutions to help our customers. In the transportation sector, in the logistic area, one thing you have to know, there are different sectors a customer can use. It's railroad, ships, and trucks, and maybe airplanes, but airplanes are very expensive. And if you look to a truck, the costs to operate a truck, 40% of the yearly costs to operate a truck, normally on the Autobahn or the interstate, is fuel. So, the pressure from a customer to us as a manufacturer to decrease the fuel is ongoing. 2% lower, 2% better efficiency will mean for our customers a lot of money. So this is a basic thing, and if you look through the transport sectors, what we need is a clear measurable that we can compare CO2 in terms of ton per kilometer. And there between railroad, ships, and of course trucks, it's based on the different kind of usage, more or less the same. So if there is a necessity to reduce further, then all the transportation sectors have to be treated the same. And this is not a kind of there is not an enemy situation between the transportation sectors. The actual transportation needs we can only fulfill if all the transportation sectors are working together and looking for the optimum. So besides that, technology, innovations, it's very good to go further. But one thing is very clear, and it's not a reason that the Minister of Transportation is sitting besides me. We need also investment in infrastructure. Railroad, it's roads, and it's the ships. And we have to be clear, and we should make a mistake there. Innovation helps. Of course, we will find different solutions. We will gain more efficiency. Besides that, we need investment. We have sometimes in Europe the feeling, or we can develop a feeling, that it means all the innovation will solve our, let's say, not up-to-date infrastructure. And that's not true. We need infrastructure investments in all sectors. Then, with some new innovations, we can come to one good solution in the future.
Ich würde noch gerne eines sagen.
There is one thing I would like to say. Our colleague from Switzerland has said the automotive industry were part of the problem when we want to find solutions. So let me switch over to German for the time being. 15 years ago, we marketed the first 3-liter car, and people in Switzerland either didn't buy it. We have Euro 4 and 5 for lorries, trucks and buses, which is wanted by politicians. However, lots of towns, also in Switzerland, quickly bought Euro 3 vehicles because they were cheaper. This is just an example that this is not just an issue for the automotive industry. What this is about is create a different awareness among the people so that people accept new solutions and buy new solutions. For that reason, we have to proceed jointly in order to foster this issue, be it by car makers, be it by the automotive industry, but also as far as efficiency of transport overall is concerned.
Please bring in Hermann Ude first. I know that Moritz Leuenberger wants to respond to that, and indeed you do need to respond, but perhaps if I can briefly bring in our last panelist and representative of logistics and ask you briefly about how you see the potential for innovation in the area of freight and shipping. You've built a brand new hub here in Leipzig with absolutely state-of-the-art technologies, relying also very much on co-modality. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go back to that response.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melinda. Very short on the hub, which you may have seen when you came in. That's a big yellow building on the other side of the airport, which is a very central structure, especially to support our trade, international trade between Europe and Asia. It's a bit closer to Asia than other infrastructures in Europe normally are. I think it's a very, very nice, very green facility, and if you have opportunity to see that, I think that is interesting. But to that point here that we have, I think as a global market leader in air freight and ocean freight and in road transport, we have 450,000 people directly. We have about 1 million people working for us in transport, and their job is to burn fuel and to deliver cargo around the world at any point in time. And this looks so magnificent and so beautiful, and we can be very proud of it. But if you had a window here and you would see a little delivery van and you had something that you would like to deliver with DHL and you see the yellow car there, you have to phone a central number and they will send a new car, because you cannot approach that car that is just in front of the door. It's just on the road, you see it there, but it cannot stop and pick your letter or pick your parcel. And that tells you a bit where the future sits. The future sits very much, and the benefit that we will have in information, in deregulation, in giving access to and giving better leverage to existing infrastructures. I think we are, especially in the developed countries, we are very much tied into huge infrastructure investments that we have made over the many years. And I think it is a bit naive to believe that through a structural modernization of infrastructure in a place like Europe or in a place like North America, you can change the system in the way that it has to be changed. We have committed to a carbon dioxide reduction target of 30% to 2020. So we want to increase our efficiency by 30%. And we will not achieve that target, which we as a board in our company have committed to, if we wait for hybrid cars, if we wait for new intermodal hubs, if we wait for these things. It has to come with intelligence, it has to come with information. To give you 2 or 3 little pieces of information, load factor on long-haul trucks in Europe is around 60%. 60%. So 40% of the trucks that frustrate you when you have to overtake them on the road are empty. Now it's not 40%, but on average they have 60% load. So some are empty, some are 80% full. 60 hours, you could say working hours, you could say holiday hours, a normal German citizen spends in a traffic jam every year. Yeah, and that is not calculated cost. We talked about allocating cost properly. We allow ourselves, and everybody knows that it is inefficient from a flow perspective in Germany and in other countries, no speed limit. And that everybody knows, and you all are experts in it, if you have high differentiation between speed on a road, you create traffic jams. That's the natural thing as all dynamic systems operate. So I think we have it all in our hands. We don't allow cabotage in Europe, or very limited. So if I go with a truck from Poland to Germany to France to deliver something, I can do 1 or 2 picks, then I have to bring it back to Poland. Now in a country like UK that has 70% inbound and only 30% outbound, it's very difficult to find directly a load that brings you back to your origin country. So that means that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trucks are running empty ex-UK into Germany, France, Italy, wherever you go. Try to get an intermodal shipment from Germany to Spain. All the oranges that you might eat in Poland or in Germany, they are brought in by trucks. Why don't they use intermodal? That's a very natural mode of transport for a commodity that needs fridging and so on. But the systems are not there, and I think that's also a bit an appeal to politicians to deregulate. We did that in the last 20 years. We made big successes. Average transport costs have come down considerably, but we need more deregulation, and I think the innovation in the time horizon that I have here with our company, 2020, 30% more efficient, is very much information technology, smart apps on an iPod that allow you to track directly the car that you want to give a delivery to, or to do smarter routing of cargo, and so on. So I think that is the thing that will deliver the fast improvements. Airplanes are currently grounded because of fuel inefficiency are Boeing 747-200. They have been developed in the early 60s and they have been deployed down to 84. That was when the last of these planes was delivered. So that tells you that the cycle for changing infrastructure and changing capex, capital investment in the airline industry is 30, 40 years. Even if we had the perfect engine here and we had somebody representing Snecma or GE or whatever company and say, we have the perfect engine, saving you 50% fuel, will take us 30, 40 years to have it deployed in a sensible and accountable way. So we have to become smarter in logistics, and I think we have only just started to do that. There's much you can do. We are trying to do that with individual customers, but also when designing our networks. And to close my little intro remark, this hub in Leipzig is one example. We put it there because the trade pattern in Europe is changing from a transatlantic to a much more Asia-Pacific to Europe trade. So this is why you find it here, and because we find a very good city here and very good support from the government. Also Mr. Tiefensee was there very instrumental to help us take that decision. So this is why this is here. But it's only part of a network. It's part of using information in a better way. And we are at least not waiting for physical infrastructures to change. Thank you.
So we heard there from both of our preceding speakers about some of the inefficiencies and inconveniences in road traffic here in Europe today. The question is, do we need technical innovations? Do we need infrastructural innovations to solve those problems, or do we need policy innovations? Let's go now to the man who has made it his personal mission to switch freight traffic from the road to the rail, Moritz Leuenberger.
Ja, vielen Dank. Es braucht natürlich all diese Innovationsstränge.
Well, of course, thank you. Of course, you need a parallel approach of all these lines. I'm quite glad that we have just heard the example that you have manufactured cleaner vehicles, but nobody wanted to buy them. And that confirms that moral appeals for a greener behavior do not really come off. I mean, there are some consumers who think it's good, but if it's about companies under the pressure of competitiveness, or when it is about municipalities, then this won't lead you to your target. And this is where climate policy comes in. This is why the political sector is called upon. If they want to reduce CO2 emissions by 30%, then they have to implement it. And if they want to do so, then they have to tax CO2 emissions. So, if there is a company or an individual consumer taxing the CO2 emission of its truck or car, then this is an incentive to buy another vehicle with lower CO2 emissions. This is the first step. And the second step is, what does the government do with the CO2 taxation? Because the government receives money, they are to pay for infrastructure with it. And us in Switzerland, we currently pay for the rail infrastructure with the yields from the truck tax. Other nations have financial difficulties as to how to finance infrastructure after the financial crisis. We all have to save and we need new income, and this is a win-win effect if you tax CO2 and use the revenue to build up infrastructure. This is the political part that has to be done, because we cannot conform ourselves, we cannot be happy with only clean vehicles on the roads. We also have to foster rail traffic in such a way that we do not need the car anymore without it having an effect on our quality of life.
That has been used here in Germany as well to try to finance infrastructure is user charging. I want to talk in just a moment about user charging in general, but perhaps let's go to Andreas Renschler first, because you have made a few points in the past about the flow of such revenues into infrastructure investment and the fact that there is a disjunction there.
If I remember right, it was some critical remarks I made there because,
indeed,
you know, if you look specifically to Europe or more or less here to Germany for a second, I think the money we gain through tax, through also the mode and other costs are not transferred to the infrastructure. I'm not talking about road infrastructure, I'm talking about the overall infrastructure. So we will be using this money for a lot of different things, and I have fully understanding that we have a lot of issues to face. But if we put additional money onto the transportation sector, we have to know, first of all, it's over and above the money we are already investing, so we can gain some more money. But this will make transportation more expensive, very simple. And it means it's not helping the economic growth. So I have nothing against to use all the money for infrastructure. And I'm talking about the tax on the fuel and such issues. They are not used at the moment. And we had also the commitment in Germany here, our customers, when we introduced the mode. A lot of customers supported it, also we as manufacturers. And we said, okay, this money has to be totally dedicated to the infrastructure for autobahns and new roads. It was dedicated, no doubt about that, but at the same time the normal budget was decreased. So, you know, the overall effect we would have imagined that we could spend more money into this field was jeopardized. So, you know, it's good to talk about such things. I think the money is there, at least from a tax point of view, we should use it to renovate the infrastructure. And I can repeat myself again. If we are not investing into the infrastructure, countries outside in Europe will overhaul us. You mentioned before China and Asia. They are doing a lot. And not only road infrastructure, also wider approach in railroad and others. So we have to be there competitive as well. And so this is a necessity in Europe.
Brief word for the English speakers in the audience. Maut is the German word for a user charge on heavy vehicles, the German user charge. We heard at the outset of the discussion, Camiel Eurlings, a plea from Robin Chase to make costs accurate and transparent so that consumers, whether they are shippers or whether they are private individuals, have a clear picture when they're making their transport choices. Aren't user charges the obvious way to do that? And if so, why are we having so many problems putting them in place? What's the difficulty with public acceptance?
Oh, I think the difficulty is that many people don't trust politicians in this respect. Because, no, let's be very realistic here. We have to understand this distrust in order to overcome it. People have feeling that at the end of the day, a road pricing system just means to grab extra money away from the people that choose the mobility. And if we are not very honest in our system, honesty is, for instance, that the money that we take goes back into investments into infrastructure. But honesty is also that when we are using the price system to incentivize people to make the green choice, to buy that car that has a very good CO2, let's say, output, a very low one, then why we don't have to take extra money? You can make the very green cars cheaper and the very not green cars more expensive. You need to be very sound in this. It's the principles that count. Of course, in London there was a local tolling system to help overcome the local congestion. Okay, it works more or less in London. But Minister Ladyman, a few years ago, when we met in Sofia in Bulgaria 3 years ago, he said, because of this system that grabs extra money away, in the rest of the country there was no more support for a national road pricing system. And that is why, after this struggle I've been doing in my country for 3 years, we will introduce, now we get elections, now everything is a little bit on hold, it will come back, we will introduce a system. The main point was to really fix the principle that we don't earn any extra euro as a government. Because this is the big distrust. People just don't trust the government in this respect. And that is what we have to overcome. If you allow me, just a very few more remarks. There was, it was said that policies are sometimes adverse. I really agree. We have to be self-critical. The cabotage situation in Europe is, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit provocative at the end of my term, is hypocrite. It is just a kind of tendency to be protectionist, which is not even a very sound one, but it's a tendency to be protectionist, that creates a situation where so many trucks travel through Europe emptily. This has nothing to do with one open Europe without internal borders. Second thing, we talk about aviation, true. It will take many years before a revolutionary new engine is used at a massive scale. But let us learn one thing about the last ash crisis we had here in Europe. Let's push on with one European sky. We talk about it for ages. If we do it, and we can do it, the flights within Europe will be 10% shorter, but because the flights will be much more direct. 10% less cost for the industry, 10% gain in terms of CO2. Just at once. We can have it in just a couple of years. So let us push on. And when you talk about the Euro norms, we are now in Rotterdam, and the port, enlarging the port massively. We are creating a new peninsula into the ocean, into the sea, the North Sea, and so I'm sorry. There, on that part, we do not just agree with all the companies that come there, that they have to make more use of train and inland shipping than trucks, but the trucks have to apply to the highest standard, otherwise they're not allowed. Is it a problem? Not at all. Once the companies know it years before, they will just adapt their investment schemes. One very last remark, lieber colleague Ramsauer, I really respect your push for electrical mobility, and I really want to support and cooperate with countries that are really front runners like yours. And I think it is a very important technology because it is not against mobility. Quite on the contrary, once you've driven an electrical car once in your life, I like sports cars. There is nothing better than the acceleration in an electrical car. So it has a high fun factor. And it's green. Green policy shouldn't be negative. It shouldn't be sour. It should be positive. And here is the big opportunity. But let us say two things. First, what you stated also, let's not just choose electrical mobility. It is true what you say, the diesel engines have become so much cleaner, and in 10 years' time there will be many diesel and gasoline engines. Second, let us align our initiatives. Many politicians are enthusiastic about electrical mobility, but the biggest threat is that every city, every province has their own initiatives, and at the end of the day it is not a coherent approach. Let us not miss this window of opportunity. We are ready to work together with the German, the French, the Japanese, the Chinese industry, but let us really do it right. We only have one chance to make this thing happen. Thank you very much.
Cyrille du Peloux, when you answered the question, you raised your hand while we were talking about user charges, but broadening it out a bit perhaps, when we look at the investment constraints and the need for investment in the transport sector, what about institutional innovation in another sense? Is there room here for public-private partnerships to come in new ways?
Oh yes, certainly. I believe that there is still a big need in terms of investment, and one of the solutions, and the crisis is pushing towards this solution, is certainly to use more the PPP or the PFI model, because some infrastructure like rail infrastructure need 30, 35 years or 40 years before you can be before being profitable for any investor. So we need public money in this infrastructure, but I think it's possible to mix public money and private money in some initiative like the PPP or PFI. I raise my finger because I think in terms of optimization, we can think for the future in a perfect world to a process of pay-per-use for the passenger. If you are in a territory and if there is an e-ticketing system or smart card system, then you can optimize in a very efficient way your trip if there is a pay-per-use, but it requires also some innovation in terms of coordination of local authorities to set up, to roll out a single system of ticketing, an electronic system of ticketing, and it requires also a compensation chamber because you have to share the commercial revenues between operators. So I think pay-per-use is certainly a way to optimize. On the other side, I also strongly support the idea that in Europe there are far too many administrative barriers and a lack of competition and a lot of monopoly are still here. Just two examples. In France, there is still a monopoly for rail passengers or for metro in Paris. And when you move from 50 kilometers outside Paris to center of Paris, you take a train, and this train you have first SNCF driver, and then at one point there is a change of driver and another driver which is a RATP driver. So it's not efficient. And when you take a bus from Paris to Brussels, you can go into the bus in Paris and go down in Brussels, but you cannot go down or climb into the bus in between. So there are a lot of barriers everywhere, and I think that we should push to have a more level playing field throughout Europe. And a lot of infrastructure are still not used. We say let's go for more rail, freight, for freight and goods, or for passengers, but there are a lot of rail infrastructure which are much underused throughout Europe still now.
Robin Chase, you wanted to add?
I wanted to make a quick comment to yours about having, when we think of road pricing, to have green cars be almost free, and I would suggest green cars should be cheaper than dirty cars, but cars, green or not, are still not free. They're still congesting, they're still driving rather than taking transit. So it needs to be cheaper than a dirty car, but less expensive than transit, that we want people to choose the rail or the other thing instead. And then when we think about these technology choices, I've talked to many governments that are thinking about these road user fees, and the concept today is that there will be a device that will be decided by the government in which everyone will put this device in their car. I think governments need to think instead about the rate structure that they want, and to have a device that is, in fact, many devices could pay that rate. And why this is interesting to me is if we want to move to getting more cost variable, we want this device in people's cars to be able to charge for congestion pricing, road pricing, parking, and other consumer applications that I might want on top of that. So to think of the device in cars as something that is not a single closed proprietary only for road user fees, but something that is more like a smartphone in which we can put many applications on top. And I think that will make increased acceptance, and from a consumer standpoint, I will not be thinking that is the government telling me to put this device in my car. It's something instead that I can use for many, many things, not just that one.
Unless we have any other additions, I would like to go now to Dr. Ramsauer for brief closing remarks. Anybody else, anything to add on the discussion so far? Because I know that we are getting close to our coffee break time, and I imagine our audience is eager to get some refreshment. Here, Uda.
Very briefly on what Robin said, I think it's quite amazing that we start now to look at passengers as we look as cargo. Nobody would have the idea to move a pallet in a full truck through Europe, but nobody has a problem in moving one passenger in one car through Europe still. So I think we are just, we don't have to be too innovative, we just have to apply what we do with other things, and I think this comparison may give you something because it's much more efficient. I don't know what the average load factor for passenger cars, can't be much more than 40%. I don't know exactly and maybe that can really be improved. And maybe also we can get all the paper pushing around moving into some smart IT, because Europe still spends 20% of the logistics costs are paper pushing, customs, papers, and transport documents. If you move something between two ocean ports, it's still 2 times paper in 2 countries in Europe. So I think there's a lot to do for politicians, and a lot of leadership needed on that end.
Innovation theorists talk about 2 different kinds of innovation. One is incremental innovation, innovation that's meant to help us meet existing goals, whether they be efficiency or safety. And the other one is transformative innovation, innovation that goes far beyond that to change the entire way that a system works. Minister Ramsauer, when you look 20 years ahead, Mobility 2020, what do you see in your crystal ball, bearing in mind those 2 different kinds of innovation?
Diese Frage wird dem deutschen Verkehr
The German transport minister gets this question once a week, so I get this question very often, and my usual answer is very practical and very pragmatic. When you take those 20 years you have mentioned, if you were to fold those years over, so when you look back into the past, what was the world like 20 years ago? 20 years ago, I was elected to the German parliament for the first time. I used cars, I used trams and trains, I used airplanes. At home, I was basically going to my election districts by boat and by rail, and ships were used. I used the railway as well. Nowadays I use the railways as well, and so on and so forth. So that means also in 20 years' time, I take it, we will use conventional means of transport. And it is for that reason that despite all visionary ideas, despite looking forward to future visions, utopian dreams, illusions, if you like, you should stick to what is feasible. So those 2 kinds of innovation you have mentioned, I'm more in favor of the first kind of innovation, incremental innovation, that is. The second kind of information may be a bit of a driver, but I take it in 20 years' time, I take it we will be much greener, we will be much more efficient, we will travel much more efficiently, and in 20 years' time, I take it we will be much better at linking and intertwining different modes of transport and be able to combine different modes of transport much better in 20 years' time. We will have much better combustion engines. We will have maybe a certain share of about 20% of all vehicles as electric vehicles, so I want to be realistic still. And one thing will have happened by that time, by 2020, that we will have learned a lot from each other, and I'm much in favor of doing that at a European level, that we still keep national wiggle room and leeway, that we stick to the political principle of subsidiarity. However, some other things, for instance in aviation, can be done much better at a European level. The cues are single European skies, or the volcanic ash contingency plan, or how to deal with the volcanic ash. These are 2 very important cues. And there cannot be a panacea that everybody is doing as they please in their individual countries. Unfortunately, I can see that there is a lot of national thinking for single European skies, for instance. So I take it we will, or hopefully we will have overcome that in 20 years' time. However, one thing will still stay the same in 20 years' time. So not just what changes, but what will stay. One of my ironclad principles in transport and mobility policies In a free market, in a free economic system and free society, it should be up to every individual how they get from A to B. The states will create framework conditions, but within that framework, in a free society, a free citizen should have a free option which means of transport they go for and which means of transport they select for their own company, for instance. So this should be the same in 20 years' time. Thank you very much.
Single sky and the ash cloud, because that gives me the opportunity to say that in 20 minutes, if you come back promptly, you'll be able to hear the man who can tell us all about those issues and how he proposes to deal with them. We do have the Transport Commissioner of the EU with us after the break. So go enjoy your coffee, refreshment, 20 minutes, but please do be back punctually at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you very much to all of our panelists for a truly engaging, interesting discussion.
വരുമ്പോൾ പോളല്ലാതൊരു പേടി